Okay, Shanks' power level, it makes no sense. Or is Shanks just too strong? But it doesn't make sense, okay? But I'm gonna explain, so hear me out, okay? It's no surprise that Shanks is Oda's golden boy character. He's the role model of the main character and has the most impactful presence out of any character in One Piece. Almost every scene Shanks is in is extremely memorable, and Oda is very careful with how much he uses him. But what I'm here to discuss is how Oda's handling of Shanks' power level is unintentionally, or I guess from Oda's perspective, could be intentionally creating a lot of inconsistencies with regards to the strength of other characters. And by the way, I say power level, but I don't mean it in a Dragon Ball way with clear-cut numbers, but I just mean generally.
Shout out to Dragon Ball Z, nigga.
Where he's at power-wise. Hey, One Piece fans, have you ever wished you could buy high-quality products without is the best time. The typical price of 100, big on 10% epic deal. The most careful. Power scaling has always been a hot topic because Oda is one of the most careful mangaka out there, as you want to keep things as ambiguous as possible until he's perfectly sure where each character should be. We see time and time again. He is very rarely definitively saying this character is stronger than this character. And when he does, it is because the gap is big enough to be obvious who should be stronger. Otherwise, he always inserts plausible deniability. For example, while he does give a number for the power levels of Kaku and Jabra, he also mentions that he doesn't take into account devil fruits and its mastery. Meaning, even with direct numbers, Oda leaves who's stronger between Kaku and Jabra ambiguous, which is plausible deniability I mentioned earlier. But the Doriki system definitively shows Lucci is stronger than both of them by a wide margin, which we kind of already assumed since Oda already said he's the strongest in CP9's history, and he is their leader, hence why Oda feels comfortable disclosing that he's clearly stronger. And a similar thing happened with Rayleigh and Sabaody. He doesn't know exactly how strong Rayleigh is, but because he's just so far ahead of all the rookies, he's fine disclosing that he's way stronger. But what Oda does work with the most though, even more than other authors, is portrayal. He's a master of building implied hype, but also giving himself enough ambiguity to potentially gaslight you into thinking you just misunderstood if he needs to later on. And I've been caught, and we've all been victims of it before. But now with that out of the way, let me take you on the ride of Shanks' roller coaster of power scaling throughout this story, because whenever Oda really wants to hype up a character to the degree of, yo, this guy is him, he actually uses Shanks as the hype tool by showing Shanks to be either slightly weaker or at most an equal to the strongest guy around. In East Blue, the strongest person we knew for a while was Mihawk. Mihawk, as the world's greatest swordsman, is said to be a greater swordsman than Shanks is. And soon after, we see him pulling up to Shanks with the implication that he is an old rival. Now, we can all agree at least that Shanks was portrayed to be somewhat Mihawk's equal, even if Mihawk was the world's greatest swordsman, or rather strongest swordsman. Now, if people had to rank them at the time, they'd be right after each other. This was the first instance of Shanks being used to hype someone else. Now, after Mihawk, the next person who was identified as the strongest in the story was, well, Whitebeard, with the title of the strongest man. I always talk about perception versus reality because Whitebeard, upon his introduction as the world's strongest man, was literally hooked up to a bunch of machines, which is seemingly keeping him alive or at least healthy. So there was a dichotomy between what we were seeing and actually what was going on in the story.
The GOAT, best One Piece character by a mile, bro. Thus far for me. Whitebeard, Shirohige, Oyaji. Shout out to Whitebeard, bro. Shout out to the Whitebeard Pirates.
Story, which is heavily implied in several instances in One Piece, perception of a character versus what the reality of the situation is. But I digress. At the time, we took the strongest man as a fact and not as a relic from Prime Whitebeard era. And of course, the strongest man is a more impressive title than strongest swordsman. But the first time we see Whitebeard in action, he clashes with Shanks as an equal. Even though once again Whitebeard was portrayed to be the strongest, Shanks was shown to be right there behind him. Now, Whitebeard remained as the strongest character in the fandom's eyes until Marineford, where it became clear he was well past his prime, meaning there are now likely stronger people out there, namely the other Yonko, maybe some fleet admirals. But besides Shanks, we knew about Kaido and Big Mom. So Shanks was said to have gone and stopped Kaido from coming to Marineford. Again, he stopped the man who was chasing battles from coming to Marineford, once again portraying him on the same level as Kaido at least, who is now a candidate as the strongest. So Shanks should be somewhat equal to Kaido at least to have that much authority or power to stop another Yonko and send him back to where he came from. And of course, we can't forget about Kaido having Shanks in his top 5. But up until now, Shanks has never been shown to be the single strongest guy around, but instead always as the guy who was portrayed to be, I don't know, slightly weaker than the strongest. But fast forward to Kaido's introduction, we now have the strongest creature, the ultimate embodiment of power and might, a little ogre or oni with a club and a devil fruit of the king of beasts, a dragon. The word creature literally should include every living thing under it, and Mihawk was the strongest swordsman, which is a subcategory of men, which is a subcategory of creatures. When it's a one-on-one, you always bet on Kaido. Out of all living
one-on-one, bro, I'm betting on Whitebeard. Yeah, Prime Whitebeard, bro. I'm betting Prime Whitebeard is stronger than Prime Kaido. Kaido is that dude. He is strong, but I do think that Prime Whitebeard is stronger than Kaido. My opinion.
things, including crazy sea monsters we may not know.
Comment down below who you think is stronger, like Whitebeard or what's it? Whitebeard or Kaido? Who do you think is stronger?
About yet Kaido was supposed to be stronger than them all. You just cannot get any more narrative hype as the strongest individual than that. And for a while after his introduction, Kaido was widely considered to be the strongest, and while side content like data books, Viver cards, novels, and so on are not always necessarily correct, they all implied Kaido being the strongest individual character, whereas Shanks got more emphasis on his commanders rather than himself. In fact, in the Ace novel, it was said to be considered a fully fledged Yonko. You have to be at least as strong as Shanks, basically saying Shanks is the lowest bar for a Yonko. Now, even if you don't take them to be canon, it at least proves that the general sentiment was that Kaido was probably the strongest, with Shanks slightly below him, yet he stopped him. But once we get to Onigashima, no one can really say that Kaido was disappointing. He was by far the strongest opponent Luffy faced and far more resilient than any other character we have seen. He defeated Luffy not one, not two, not three, but 4 times in the same arc. We all saw how strong he was, and no one can take that from him until well, we meet Shanks again. As the epitome of strength, Kaido stood at the top of most people's list, but the problem was that he was not the final antagonist or the final villain. The natural flow of a shonen battle manga demands a stronger villain than the previous to create tension, and because the protagonist gets stronger over time, well, it's almost expected. But since we're now finally at a point where Shanks will have to be a lot more active in the story, as we've seen, from a writer's perspective, it's necessary to remind the readers how strong he is since, well, it has been a while. And yet again, in classic Oda style, by making him an equal to the strongest guy around, except Kaido isn't there anymore. I guess he did go after Blackbeard, but Blackbeard wasn't there. And in order for Shanks' showcase to be hype, we cannot have him do something on a level of something we've seen before, right? But is he going to scare off another Sea King? Pfft, that's nothing. Is he going to give us another Yonko caliber feat? We already know he's a Yonko, and we literally just got done packing up 2 Yonko at once. This meant that Oda can't do the same as before. He had to go beyond that, and because there wasn't another strongest guy around to be compared to, Shanks for once appears to be, well, the strongest guy around, which with a single attack, which we can presume to be not even the strongest attack, he was able to take out not only Kid, but Killer as well. Now, something that people always try to downplay is that Kid and Killer, they're not that strong anyway, so it is what it is. Kid is a bum. But Kid has taken attacks from Kaido several times, Big Mom several times, and he got back up, and he was one of the more durable, having insane endurance characters in Onigashima, easily, even whilst taking damage from Killer and Hawkins' fight, because that was the whole story around it. He kept fighting Big Mom. Say what you want about Kid and Killer. There's no way Kaido or Big Mom, for that matter, were one-shotting both Kid and Killer in Onigashima with a single Thunder Bagua or Ikaku sovereignty, let alone the Kid and Killer after Onigashima, who got much stronger in their fights. That Kid literally took an Ikaku sovereignty to the face and got back up immediately. It not only undermines Big Mom, who couldn't take down Kid, but by extension Kaido as well, who was shown to be many times on the same level as Big Mom, if not very slightly stronger. But what we saw from Shanks here isn't just some slight difference to what Kaido Big Mom can do. A single normal attack taking out post Wano, Kid, and Killer is way above the level of what Big Mom and Kaido have been shown to do, I think. This introduces the same issue of when Kaido one-shot Luffy in Act 1. And through that chapter, everyone understood that there's actually a massive gap between a first Yonko commander and the Yonko themselves, which kind of undermined Katakuri's strength, but that was ultimately accepted because Katakuri, at the end of the day, he's a Yonko subordinate. But when it comes to this, it undermines other characters who were supposedly supposed to be on the same level as Shanks and creates, I think, a significant gap between Shanks and Kaido or Big Mom. based on logic, because Shanks was made into a chameleon that constantly matches the strongest character around. And if you were to compare the characters he was matched with throughout the series, we find ourselves with a few things that are very hard to grasp. First of all, whenever Shanks gets hyped, Mihawk by default rides that wave, as he should technically be stronger than Shanks. Now, if you were to hypothetically say Mihawk is stronger than Shanks, who is apparently now stronger than Kaido, who's significantly stronger than old Whitebeard, who's significantly stronger than his own commanders, it then puts Mihawk many tiers above Marineford Whitebeard and even more tiers above his commanders, which retroactively makes a ton of scenes and dialogue nonsensical. If Mihawk was that much stronger than Whitebeard himself, in what world is Mihawk getting held back by Vista? So in all actuality, based on the story, it should be Mihawk.
Mihawk was not going all out against Vista. I love the Whitebeard pirates, but Mihawk was like, Luffy is very strong. Yeah, he's very strong. I don't think that Mihawk went like 20%, 30% of what he can really do. Like, Mihawk hasn't even done a named attack yet. Yeah, think about that. It's crazy. One Piece is very crazy, and I'm very hyped to find out what's going on in the future. Stay tuned.
Over Shanks, over Kaido, over Big Mom, over Old Whitebeard, over Marco, over Ace, over Jozu, over Thatch, over Vista, over Luffy. Mihawk at that point should be the strongest person in Marineford by far. But Mihawk himself confirms that he was not holding back versus Luffy. So to not be able to even one-shot pre-time skip Luffy, who's even weaker than the commanders, is like Shanks not being able to one-shot current Nami while being fully serious. As ridiculous as it is, you can make a solid argument that post-Wano Kid and Killer combined are weaker than pre-time skip Luffy. And if you want to get even crazier with it, since most people agree Kid and Killer combined are probably stronger than Law alone, we can say that 2 pre-time skip Luffys could take down Big Mom. And seeing how much all the Straw Hats combined struggle with a single pacifista, it wouldn't be out of the question to say a single pre-time skip pacifista is stronger than Big Mom. Okay, you see, I'm joking, right? But it gets ridiculous. And the problem is you can't even convincingly say that is that wrong. You'd have to first prove that Shanks can't one-shot Kid and Killer, which we already saw happen. Or prove that Kid and Killer combined are significantly weaker than Law, which everyone would have to look at you weirdly for. Or maybe try to say Mihawk wasn't trying against Luffy back then, which
He wasn't trying.
Mihawk himself word for word denied, and we saw that he was going for the kill when he sliced that ice wave when Luffy dodged. And so all of the somewhat reasonable power scaling we had before this falls flat. Even putting Luffy aside, to be held back and not be able to go past Vista, who is arguably the 5th strongest Whitebeard commander, it's hilarious, all right? Since Mihawk is at least Shanks level, to make sense of things, people were even hyping him up or hyping Vista up to be actually Admiral caliber or something. Even though we saw him unable to do anything versus Akainu with Marco. And this isn't an issue of how, Oda didn't know how strong the characters are in Marineford. He knew very well, but all these issues can be directly traced back to the inconsistent scaling of Shanks and the moment when Kaido one-shot Luffy, which definitively put first commanders as significantly weaker than Yonko. Now, if Mihawk wasn't definitively known to be at least Yonko level by being equal or superior to Shanks, Vista versus Mihawk could have made a whole lot more sense because it would be seen as a duel between some of the top swordsmen in the world, and we would have no other gauge of swordsmen. But because Shanks is a Yonko and simultaneously a swordsman, and from what it looks like, one of, if not the strongest guy in the show right now, it then makes Mihawk being unable to go past Vista, who's at most the 3rd strongest commander, comical, because we know for a fact there is no comparison between those two. So now, I want you to imagine an equivalent scenario of Shanks, who is comparable to Mihawk, about to attack Luffy, but gets stopped in his tracks by Cracker or Paraspero, who are comparable to Vista. Now, we've talked a lot on how Oda has handled Shanks specifically, but if you want the more truthful explanation, it really stems from Shanks being introduced a bit too early in the story. And you want him to be a mysterious character, but without knowing how long your story will go on for, or what's even the ceiling of power in your story, it leaves things open-ended. One Piece is already far longer than Oda ever imagined, so it could be that naturally the characters have become stronger than he thought they could get. That's why the scaling of early One Piece characters gets complicated, which Shanks just happens to be. That level...
Example is also Crocodile. Crocodile was defeated very early on, but that was like back in Alabastra. One Piece was supposed to be only going for 5, maybe 4 years. 20 plus years later, we're still continuing with the series, with the manga and the anime. So One Piece just got stretched out, Gomu Gomu no, like Luffy. But yeah, One Piece early power scaling, it is kind of wacky, but it's kind of like Crocodile is strong, very strong, but he got defeated with Luffy without Haki, Luffy without this, Luffy without that, Crocodile, bro. One Piece early times, before the time skip, especially like early One Piece, take it with a little bit grain of salt. That's all I'm asking. That's all I'm telling you.
of uncertainty of how long the story will be is also part of the reason why Oda likes to keep things somewhat open-ended, to not restrict himself of what he could do down the line. The whole point of it is this: power scaling is going to be inconsistent and largely subjective. Things are not going to make sense. Sometimes they won't match up. So therefore, you really shouldn't take it that seriously. When a character gets overhyped or downplayed, I don't think it's significant to just that one character. It's just that,
again, bro, Green Bull is very hated, overhated in my opinion in the community. Just because he was not admiral, bro. He is an admiral. He is strong. He's basically Hashirama in One Piece. Yeah. So he has been very, I think, like, the scripting hasn't been very nice to Green Bull. I can't pronounce it like his real name, but I don't think it's too bad for him. Like, his feats has been pretty good this far, but it is what it is.
that character's turn. It depends on what's happened lately. And literally the One Piece community is comprised of people that says, what have you done for me lately? Currently, the Admiral stocks are down because they're battling against commanders of the revolutionaries who we have no idea how strong they are. It doesn't matter what happened beforehand. It doesn't matter that being an admiral is literally a title based on just strength. What have you done for me lately? And Akainu, even though he's beaten Aokiji, he's thrown into that mix as well. Aokiji's currently fighting Garp, who a lot of people seemingly, it seems like Garp is easily stronger than Aokiji according to some people. Then that means Akainu by proxy is also weak as well. So therefore, what should you do? Not take it as seriously. It is what it is. Things happen, and therefore, when you look at Shanks and everything he accomplished defeating Kid and Killer, it's actually ridiculous. But one more thing I want to throw in and throw Kid some bail here is that what Shanks did, of course, his attack was overwhelming, but in the midst of it, we have to look at something. Kid not only took Shanks' attack, he also took the brunt of his own attack that blew up in his face. And that attack was going to destroy multiple ships. So therefore, yes, we can scale it as Shanks one-shotting Kid and Killer, but it's also skewed because there's so much going on in that moment. So how can you really power scale? I think One Piece has some of the best power scaling and discussions because things are so open-ended, and it's going to continue to be that way. So I don't know, just keep having fun with it. But Shanks, right now, ridiculous.